my next guest is, I would say, the leading progressive talk radio and television host in this country. His radio program is syndicated in a number of markets. He is a New York Times best-selling author. He's written 24 books. He's been honored with the Project Censored Award 4 times. I'm also proud to say he is a good friend, and as we launch ourselves on a new voyage here at the 0 hour of also having a television program on free speech radio, I've been looking forward to his thoughts on the current state of media. So Thom Hartmann, welcome to the program.
Richard, it's great to be here with you. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you. And I wanted to just start out by saying you've been at this game for a while, progressive media. I'm relatively new to it. It's only been a few years for me. But am I right in thinking that in some ways we're now in uncharted territory in terms of how to maintain an independent progressive voice?
Yeah, probably. You know, the media problems that we have in the United States are largely, I think, the result of Reagan's decision in '82 to stop enforcing the Sherman Act. So, you know, we had all these mergers and acquisitions, and the media got swept up in that as well. And then the FCC started dialing back on the ownership rules, and then the Telecommunications Act in '96, when Clinton signed that, it kind of blew everything apart. And so now you've got 8,000 radio stations in the United States. Out of those, there's probably 1,000 that are of any consequence, that are, you know, large stations. Virtually all of them, you know, with literally the exception of probably a dozen, are owned by 2 companies, and those 2 companies are, or 3 companies if you throw in Salem, and those 3 companies are very political. I mean, I had lunch, must be 10 years ago now, or I sat next to, at a Talkers Magazine luncheon, sat next to one of the vice presidents of Salem Radio, and I said, you know, we do a great show. We get, you know, I'm beating Limbaugh in Seattle and in Miami. I mean, wouldn't you love to carry my show? And he's like, no, we don't put progressives on the air. Mm-hmm. We just don't. You know, we're owned by a Bible publishing company. We don't only put on conservatives. He was at least honest with me. But so in the radio sphere, there's that, and then in the television sphere, I mean, you've got MSNBC right now. Andy Lack is actively working to fire progressives. He just took down Steve Kornacki and replaced him with Nicole Wallace. You know, she's a Republican consultant. He was a progressive, or is a progressive. Any day now, in all probability, Lawrence is going to go, or at least that was the plan. You know, they want to replace Lawrence with Brian Williams, and you know, Lack is. It's no secret. I mean, you know, he's trying to turn the network into something that is more, quote, mainstream, which really, in my mind, is more acceptable to Comcast, which is the corporate owner. And the fact that you know, Chris and Rachel, the 2 principal progressives on there, have you know, to the best of my knowledge, not even spoken about net neutrality, which I think is one of the great issues of our time, because Comcast is actually suing the government, or at least was, you know, to stop net neutrality. I think, you know, speaks to some of these issues of corporate control. It's a very difficult one, and so the television media space is very narrowly circumscribed, and you know, giant corporations owning that too. So
yeah, and you know, my sense has always been, you know me, Thom. I mean, I'm never satisfied, and I always felt that MSNBC was overly constrained, particularly during the Obama years, by the limitations of Democratic policy at any given time. I felt they were. Even their more progressive hosts like Rachel Maddow and less so Chris Hayes, but I would say Rachel and to a certain extent Lawrence O'Donnell were maybe, for whatever reason, including perhaps personal belief, very much in sync with a party line there, or unwilling to go too far to challenge it. So I wasn't even thrilled then. Now it seems to me as if what's happened is that with the ascent of the Republicans to almost complete political dominance, they have 2/3 of state governments, they have 2/3 of governorships, and as well as legislatures, they have both houses of Congress, they have the presidency. It's almost as if that sort of narrow bandwidth of what used to be called bipartisan consensus, which some of us spent years fighting for its own misguided ideas about Social Security or deficits or whatever. But it seems as if that what was formerly accepted bandwidth is being moved further to the right, and almost as if perhaps what, for example, Andrew Lack is doing at MSNBC is reacting to that by saying you can't even have a Rachel Maddow anymore, who spends most of her time these days talking about Russia. I would like to see Rachel and Lawrence talk more about inequality, talk more about vote stealing, talk more, but even so, it's not. It seems as if the landscape has moved further to the right, and even that level, it's almost as if being a member of the Democratic Party is equivalent to being a dissident in media now.
Yeah, it seems, and I don't want to form a circular firing squad here with people who are, more or less on our side, but Free Speech TV presents an extraordinary alternative. The problem the free speech is facing is that they're not on every cable system in the country. The thing in Manhattan Neighborhood Networks is a great coup. It's an extraordinary thing.
I don't know about it actually.
Oh, Free Speech TV is in every home in Manhattan.
Oh, great! And
which is a lot of people. And in addition to Dish and Direct and on the internet, and I think internet delivery is picking up, and they're on Hulu, and I understand that they're developing an Apple TV app and things like that. So that's good stuff, and increasingly there's a very strong presence, progressive presence in YouTube. For example, although YouTube now has dramatically cut revenue, we've seen about a 70% drop in our revenue in the last month and a half, since they decided that they weren't going to put ads on shows that dealt with political issues. And this was, blowback against, I guess, Alex Jones and that kind of stuff. And, but who knows? But I know that it's blown up a number of, business models for people. So it's a tough one. But, we live in a country that is consumed by capitalism, and capital is calling the shots, and capital doesn't like dissent.
Yeah, and this gets us to another point, and again, we're talking with Thom Hartmann, progressive radio host and author, which is the role of the internet companies in media now, which was we didn't have in 82 or 96 or even 10 years ago, where a Google, which owns YouTube, and a Facebook are such overwhelming presences that I think they even dwarf the influence of the radio station corporate. I mean, arguably, I don't know which is, but there's certainly a massive presence, those two companies. And I worry sometimes, and I've written about this a little bit, but I worry that we've almost turned over some of what we think of as our freedoms of speech or our press freedoms to these companies, not just in terms of business models, but if Google decides to ban a company from a search or a consultant or a lawyer or anyone else, it's not that they have, but they have enormous power to pretty much make or break something.
Well, they don't even have to ban it. They can, and we've seen this with Google back when they were just a search engine. They can just simply change the way that their algorithm works, and suddenly, your website or your show or your whatever that was number 3 in the search now is number 300. And so you've effectively vanished, Yeah, and you look at the amount of traffic that Facebook has consolidated too. I mean, this, on the one hand, it's like, okay, this stuff is all like really ripe for antitrust action. On the other hand, they've done such a good job of integrating stuff. I mean, everybody wants to get on Facebook and be with all of their relatives everywhere. And if you had to join 5 different Facebooks, then how does that work? And I don't even have an answer for that. I don't know, how to deal with that in an antitrust context. But
my proposal, by the way, that I wrote, I think in 2014, was to regulate them as public utilities.
Yeah.
Allow them to maintain the profit. I mean, they're privately owned. Okay, they can be privately owned. But to say that at this point it's as vital to the economic survival of individuals, businesses, and communities as access to electrical power is. So there should be some sort of rules of the road.
Once you have a functional monopoly, or a functional natural monopoly, it's like, electricity coming into your home. How many wires do you have coming into your home bringing electricity? One, water, sewage, septic. These natural monopolies, you do have to regulate them as public utilities, telephone. And yeah, that's a brilliant way to do it. And unfortunately, we're moving in the opposite direction. We're moving toward deregulation of radio space, of television space, of the internet now. And deregulation is simply a fancy word that means give more power to the large corporate actors and take power away from the consumers and from government that might have the interests of the consumers on its side.
Yeah, I completely agree with this. So let's switch in the last stage of our conversation, Thom Hartmann, to a more uplifting note, if we will. What can we do, those of us who have, to whatever degree each of us has, in the media, a voice? What can we do to present an alternative? How much can we change the narrative? What are good strategies for trying to change the narrative and change the direction of the country?
I think Bernie Sanders really has laid it out well, and basically, and in fact, it's not even really Bernie. It's FDR. I mean, it's not like we have to rediscover all this stuff. We know how to make a functioning democracy in an industrialized society, in a capitalist society, work. We know how to do that. We did that. We did that in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and arguably through the 80s. The damage that Reagan inflicted really didn't start showing up until the 90s. And now we've had 30 years of neoliberalism, which is kind of the reverse of this. That's just destroying all this. But I think just getting back to basics and talking about them, talking about health care as a right, Roosevelt actually, and just before he died, proposed that health care should be a right.
The Four Freedoms,
yeah,
right? Wasn't that in the Four Freedoms speech?
Well, yeah. I'm not sure. I think it was his new Bill of Rights, his second Bill of Rights speech. Yeah. But in any case, he said, let's say that health care should be a right, housing should be a right, food should be a right, employment should be a right. And if capitalism fails to provide for employment, the government becomes the employer of last resort, which, by the way, is exactly what FDR did. We have done that here in the United States. We know how to do this. Right. It's not rocket science. And it works. It worked wonderfully. And there were still people getting rich. They just weren't getting rich like Koch brothers rich. They weren't getting, going from 5 to 10 to 30 to 50 to $80 billion rich. They were getting, 100 million, 300 million, 500 million. So, which frankly, I think this vast accumulation of wealth in a very, very small number of hands, at the same time that the middle class is collapsing, is not a good thing for democracy.
No, it's not at all. And what we're seeing is that people are so wealthy now in the wealthy, ultra wealthy class that they can't even spend their money. All they can do is park it, because we're seeing rates of idle money go up to 20, 25, 30% in these groups, where they should be, ideally you have, where the wealthy people have ways to invest their money productively to help the society continue to grow.
We've financialized our culture.
Yeah,
our business culture.
So I guess what we can do is talk about these issues and maybe reinforce the principles that worked so well for a Roosevelt era, the principles of community, the principles of all being in it together, the principle of the government as a reflection and tool of the people, and what the people need,
and Roosevelt said this over and over again, that corporate power is power, and the only thing that can restrain that power, and it's a power that can be harmful to the average person, and the only thing that can restrain that power is government. There is no entity large enough to take on a giant corporation other than government. So it's an entirely appropriate role. And I mean, keep in mind, when, in 1933, when he became president, we had literally communists on one side, here in the United States, an active communist party. My grandfather was part of it. And you had the fascists on the other, the Charles Lindbergh faction, who were saying, oh, we should go the way of Nazi Germany. Right. And it was like, okay, do we want to become like the Soviet Union or like Nazi Germany? And Roosevelt threaded that needle. He took us right through the middle and said, no, we're not going to do either of those two things. We're going to do this basically democratic socialism, although I'm not sure the phrase was in use or in vogue then. And we've gone astray. We've gone astray badly since Reagan.
Well, it's time for us to get back. So I guess all we can do is use our voices and encourage that. And I don't know about you, but I think with the Bernie Sanders candidacy and the energy that's unleashed, I'm kind of optimistic.
Yeah, me too. even without Bernie. I mean, you know, then Bernie is obviously, you know, he's the energizing bunny out there. But I think what Bernie did, particularly during the campaign, you know, in those big stadium speeches and things, is I truly believe that Bernie created thousands of future Bernies.
Yeah.
That there are thousands of people out there, you know, 15 to 25, 15 to 35 years old, who have been inspired, who are going to go into politics, who are going to become activists, who are going to, you know, it's the future. We're going to change this country for the better, and God bless him for it. You know.
Absolutely, and one of those future Bernies hopefully is listening right now.
Amen.
So, all right, Thom Hartmann, thanks so much. Great to talk to you.
It's great to be here with you.